media and follow this buffhead. Now, traditionally, what I do is a tactical analysis of the game. I've focused on Australia this time, Taylor, and therefore it involves you listening to me for a couple of minutes while I go through my notes, and then obviously you will get some thoughts to think about. And uh,
Back in high school,
Rosie likes to interrupt me when I do this, and I have to tell him, no, I'm on a roll. The overriding thought I have from watching the game on the night, and I was just watching it relaxing, with a couple of beers or whatever, the Australia made loads of errors. When I went back to analyze it in depth, what became apparent to me is Australia weren't backing their talent. They were playing in a very structured manner and trying to limit their opposition a bit too much. You can either just back yourself and just really go out to flog the opposition, or you can try and nullify some of their strengths in the process. I think Australia got that balance a bit wrong. And I think defensively, they got some nice press about their defence. They're actually really lucky that the Tonga attack was really poor. When I was looking at the Australia attack, they played between the tram lines so much. Okay, so a typical good ball set for them, for example, was playing between the tram lines, either with hit-ups or plus ones, and I'll say something about the hit-ups in a moment. And they would wait until very much the last tackle or the tackle before to do a long shift, and it tended to be right to left. And they did go long, long, long and actually played outside the tram lines. And I think that they basically wasted 4 plays in the process of doing that. I'll talk about the good ball stuff first. When they were setting up, Taylor, and you know this from when I coached you, you've got to go sideways on the right play the ball. Okay, so, and as you know from when I coach you, I'd say get to a scrum line. I used to love my scrum lines. I still do. But whatever point you go to that point. If you can get there in one, as soon as you get there, move the ball. Yeah. Don't take 2 just because you think you need 2. And my philosophy around that is that, well, first of all, if you take 2 to settle, the first thing is it gives a defense 33% of your set to just settle and work out where you're going next. Secondly, the way a lot of teams do it is the first hit up will actually do what they want it to do, which is to move the defense away from where they want to attack. So I'll try and explain this, even though we're on a podcast. If you imagine a hit up to the right that went near the right scrum line, the defense that you see on the right as you're watching the television will move down the screen somewhat, and they will number up accordingly on that play the ball. Invariably, somebody puts too many players on the wrong side of the play the ball there, so you can just shift the ball to the left or the top of the screen as you're watching it on telly. What Australia did quite often was do that first hit up and have the Tonga defense exactly where I would have thought they'd have wanted them. And then they took another hit up inside that allowed the Tonga defense to move back over to the right or back up the screen. So it was very hard for them then to try and play around them. So they went +1 or something like that towards the opposite tram line. So the Tonga defense just moved a bit there. And it was just quite easy to read. And I can promise you the Tonga side had a lot more to worry about in the Australia side than the Australia side had to worry about in the Tonga defense. So I think they were playing within themselves far too much. They also, to my mind, were too obsessed on exit with running at the Tonga 7. They were obsessed with the middle of the field and the Tonga 7 and kicking to the right. And I don't think they could have done it in any better way for the Tongans to deal with. Because if imagine you're a nation that thinks Australia is this all-conquering nation, the last thing you want them to do is play football. Right? The last thing you want is early ball in the Hammer's hands or Tommy Turbo's hands. The thing you want is for them to come nice and directly at you, particularly if you're Tonga, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the other big problem with their performance, Moses was obviously off colour. I mean, he did a block shape really early and just went straight to his front man. If he'd have gone to the back man, they could have opened up some space. It's just a rugby league problem. But they just kept messing up these plays. There were at least 5 big errors in the first half, where if they'd have connected, there may have been a few more points on the scoreboard, and the scoreboard pressure will have influenced Tonga. And this is why I say it was one of the worst, probably the worst Australian performance I've seen, because the execution was awful. They lost ball early in the tackle counts. They sometimes lost the ball and Tonga had chance to play in their half of the field. This isn't the Australia that we've grown up with, Taylor. The handling was poor. In defence, honestly, sometimes it's like watching the same thing week in, week out with some of these teams. They put numbers in the tackle in the first couple of tackles from the kickoff. And then the rest of the sets, they just do what they plan to do all along. And I don't know what the obsession is with those first 2 tackles, putting 3 or 4 men in. But anyway, they were a nice compressed defence. The collisions were quite poor considering the compressed. If my defence is compressed, I want them to be really physical.
Aggressive.
I want them, if you run at a compressed defence, you are brave.
Yeah.
Because the bodies are tighter. And I don't think they were really physical in that sense. It seemed that their ruck control efforts were all about trying to hold them down on the ground, and I thought the ref gave loads of latitude. It's a good job. It's not an English ref, so if they were playing against England in England, they'd have been penalised more than an erratic driver. So they were nice and compressed. And one of the big things about a compressed defence is when it slides, it's probably got to stay together. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to shooters, and there was a bit of that going on. And the split has to be perfect on a compressed defence, and the split was off on a couple of occasions. So there's my little tactical diatribe there. Yeah. And also, in a sign that their attack wasn't clicking, the first try they scored was an intercept.
And I think some of the points you're raising, Lee, people can easily hide behind certain things. Like you've said, they were quite poor in their handling errors and the way they attack. Well, people can turn around and say, well, they've only been in camp for a week. They've only just gelled together. It's a rep team. There are excuses people can lay out for that performance. At the end of the day, what people need to remember is that this is the Australian Kangaroo side. These are the best. These are the best players.
The benchmark. The benchmark of our sport.
This is it. This is the best we have, and has been the best we have for a long, long time. Of course, New Zealand Rugby League deserves a shout out there because they've beaten us a lot recently, but it simply wasn't the benchmark. Not just in their performance, but the just handling. There was loads of issues across the park, and it's not what the Kangaroos should be. It was certainly quite a poor performance. And I actually agree with you on some of the collisions. I thought if you're just looking at a heart perspective, there's been a lot of bad publicity about whether the Australians care about the Kangaroos jersey anymore, whether it holds that aura. I thought the performance almost solidifies that opinion. I don't think there's as much respect put into it. It certainly felt that respect and that aura around the Tongan jersey, which is magnificent how they've turned that around in the last couple of years, and a movement started by Tom Alolo and a few of those guys. But yeah, I think that you're absolutely right in the things you've said there about the Australians and the way they played football the other night, because it turned into a very dull game of football to watch, a very dull game of football to watch, and not something you'd expect from the pinnacle of the game.
I'd love nothing more than for England or Great Britain to beat Australia in a Test series or an Ashes series before I die. And I don't think if I lived for another 100 years at the moment, I'm not confident, that I could see that. But the reality is, England or Great Britain probably have never had a better chance with Australia like this. So they need to get their house in order to try and take this on. And Australia actually host England in the Ashes next year. So England come to Australia. A lot of the English players already play in the NRL, so they're very used to Australian conditions and the Australian game.